I will talk about the role of vulnerability in disclosures. Okay. Now, we know that whenever we're trying to move out of that comfort zone, we are feeling a little bit vulnerable. Okay. And that's to be expected in every disclosure. There's going to be a certain degree of vulnerability in those disclosures. Now, what feels risky and most vulnerable is when you're especially uncertain about the impact of your disclosure. Okay, and maybe that's the reason why a lot of people don't want to disclose, because of that uncertainty. They don't know how the other person is going to react. In the same way as there are things that the other person will tell us, and our reactions, our feelings about that can vary. Okay, we also know that that can happen to the other person based on our own disclosures. Now, if you have disclosed something many times in similar settings, and you have a pretty good sense of how the others are going to react, even if it's negative, well, you can make that decision whether you want to be disclosing this or not. But you won't feel as vulnerable as when you sense that, okay, I really don't know how the other person is going to react. And that's what makes self-disclosure truly vulnerable. And yet, that's a paradox, because if we really want to build relationships, we have to allow ourselves to be vulnerable. Okay. Now, the common concern people have about disclosure is that other people will see them as weaklings. Okay. They're weak. They don't have what it takes. They don't have the chops. Well, it can be argued that disclosure and an expression of vulnerability is actually a source of strength, because you actually moved out of your initial instinct to play safe, okay, and letting yourself be known by other people. Okay, and this is something that is a paradox when we try to compare leaders. Now, we appreciate leaders more, uh, perhaps not consciously, when they've shown themselves to be a little bit more vulnerable. If we've seen them try to allow other people to get into their own world. Okay. And yet there are some leaders who are against that idea of disclosure and vulnerability, because precisely for that instinct that it makes them be perceived as somebody weak or somebody less worthy. Okay. Now, if disclosure casts doubt on the person's competence to that job, okay, it's possible that sharing the information can really cause a loss of influence and respect. But on the other hand, it can also be seen, the person can also be seen as somebody who is more human, who's more like us, which helps in making that connection. What you're trying to do when you're building exceptional relationships is that you're trying to also find common ground. Okay. Of course, the most obvious common ground is that you're both human beings. If the other person has this discomfort in detecting that idea from you that you're also a human being, then the connection won't happen. Okay. So think about it. If your objective is to build relationships, then definitely disclosure is the way to go. Okay. Now, if your objective is to try to protect something, okay, be it your integrity, your dignity, or institution's integrity, okay, then you'll probably be justified in not making that disclosure. But remember, uh, not disclosing also has its cost. Being silent also has its cost. Safe or lukewarm comments are not risk free. Okay, in the absence of information, in the absence of data, people can make stuff up. They need to fill the gaps with assumptions, with information. Okay, and because that's how we are wired, okay, biologically, which is essential for our survival. If there are gaps in our knowledge, we try to supply it with assumptions so that we can move forward. That's really a practical thing. Okay? Now, if we don't want the other person to have wrong assumptions about us, then it's probably better to speak up. Okay? Even if it may mean uh, at the same time being embarrassed or being humiliated perhaps, okay, but at least the fact is out there. Okay. The less we reveal, the more others will fill in the blanks in order to make a sense of what they perceive or see. Now, there's a different kind of silence. Okay, obviously, the first kind is just simply not disclosing anything, being absolutely silent. But there's a different kind of silence. It's really not silent if you think about it because you are saying something. But this kind of silence occurs when we only share an image or a caricature of ourselves. Okay, in those cases, the others still can't see or know who we really are. Okay, they're given a picture, an image of something that's probably further from the truth. Okay. Even if we are successful in selling our image, this is not a good thing to have. Okay. And certainly will backfire along the way. Uh, and that type of silence actually leads to people being secretive. Okay. And there's a cost to that. So there's a cost in not disclosing, there's also a cost in being secretive. Okay. Important parts of ourselves are often related to other aspects of who we are. Okay. At some point in time, people will detect whether we're being secretive or yeah, there's really nothing to it. Okay. Hiding one part can lead to hiding much more, resulting in progressive impoverishment of what we show and ultimately our relationships. Eventually, our relationships will erode because certain portions of ourselves still remain under secret. Now, again, it doesn't have to be all the case. At the start of every relationship, you have to understand how much or how far you want to go with this relationship. So depending on your assessment of that interaction and how far you want to take that relationship, okay, then the appropriate disclosure will follow, right? So the point there is that we're not going to open our books in public. Okay. Well, that's not really the case. But in those interactions that we've deemed that, okay, I want to have an exceptional relationship here, then it is important for us not to be secretive, not to be silent. Okay. And there are a lot of constraints. Okay. It's difficult to see things as they are. And basically what we want to do is we want to make sure that we assess the costs of not disclosing or being secretive versus with advantage that we intend to extract from this relationship. So sometimes we have this question, what comes first? Do we try to play safe or do we disclose? It might be easy to think that we won't disclose unless the other person discloses. Okay, sometimes we have that style or that strategy. I won't disclose until the other person discloses. Well, I will argue, as with mostly everyone, that you can't expect that from the other person. The only thing you have control is yourself. So, given the information that's in front of you, if you've assessed that you want to build a relationship with this person, okay, with this interaction, you want to make it exceptional, you have to take that first step. Okay, you have to make the disclosure. Okay. It doesn't have to be a big disclosure. Okay, it's an incremental disclosure, but you will have to be the one to start, regardless of whether the other person, the other party, will also make the disclosure. Okay. And sometimes, maybe when you disclose, the other person still won't respond. That's fine. Okay. And perhaps with that, you will update the information about the relationship. Maybe you will probably decide maybe it's not worth pursuing, or maybe you want to give it more time. But the important thing is that it's really up to you on how much do you really value that relationship? How much interaction do you want to draw from that relationship? And if the answer to that question is a yes, then obviously the recommended approach is you make the disclosure first.